Good afternoon, councillors, ladies and gentlemen, and any observers. Welcome to this audit meeting on today, the 2nd of March at 5 o'clock. We're also joined by the management team, officers of democratic services, internal and external auditors, and thank you very much for your attendance. The next thing that I have to do is to take a roll call, unless Mr. Clark would like to take it. I'll proceed with a roll call. And if you would merely say that you are here, please. Thank you. Councillor Cornish.
Sorry, yeah, present.
Councillor Cromie.
Present.
Councillor Hicks.
Present.
Councillor Stockwell.
Present.
Sorry, I'm just having to go down because it's been rejigged as I went down the list on. Sorry about this, it's just constantly repaginating. It makes it very difficult. Councillor, as far as I can see, I have accepted everybody who is present. If anybody isn't present, would they please say that they are? Because at the minute, as I see it, I have called everybody. Thank you. And councillors, thank you. There's nobody come forward. So I'm going to invite Tom Clark to provide the initial explanation of the virtual meeting, and he will also explain that whilst we all have the new Zoom edition, we won't actually be using that. So over to you, Mr. Clark.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I hope everyone can hear me. This meeting is being held in accordance with the regulations that were issued by the government in April last year, given that we are not able to have in-person meetings. The chairman is obviously in charge of the meeting, but members are in charge of their own microphones. They'll be called to speak as and when the chairman indicates. Voting, as the chairman says, will be by hand. And so if we have any formal votes, it'll be hand up for the first vote, or if you're against, hand up on that vote. We haven't got the yes/no operation at the moment. At the end of the meeting, if you can stay in your place until you get advised the meeting is over. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. I'm going now to item 2, to receive apologies for absence, and those have been received from Councillor Boutrop, who is unwell, and we wish her a speedy recovery. Thank you. I'm now going to go on to item 3, which is to receive declarations of interest from members in respect of any matter on the agenda. Again, if you have any interest, please raise those by way of a raise hand function. I see no hands, so therefore I'm going to move on to item 4, is to confirm the minutes of the previous meeting held on 17th of November. Thank you. And that will be again by raising hands. Thank you, councillors. Then those are approved. And now we are to go to item 5, which is to consider any items the chairman agrees to take as urgent. I have none. That then brings us to item 6, the internal audit. And Gillian Edwards is going to introduce this. And Gillian, may I hand it over to you? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. This is the report on the work that we've undertaken since we last reported to you as at the 31st of August last year. We've completed 3 pieces of work: council tax, NNDR and housing benefits, and we've given assurance levels of satisfactory and substantial, which are excellent given that the unprecedented workload of finance in the last few months, that to have such a good outcome. It looks like we haven't completed much work, and that is the case. However, all of the work that we have to complete until the end of the financial year is underway, and I'll talk you through that a little bit later on when we come to the work in progress. If I could now move to high priority findings. We had none in this audit, and follow-up audits, we undertook just one follow-up this time around, and that was another look at the contract register, where we found at the time that we looked at it, which was 15th of February, there were still some items outstanding that hadn't yet been put on. I've spoken today with Tom Clark, who's confirmed that the register has been updated as of yesterday, and that all but 4 have since been added, and these 4 will be put on the 1st of April. So it will be up to date at that point. So it's good to see progress is being made on the contract register. If we could please move on to page 11, which is my progress report. All of the items under D to complete before the financial year end, they've now been allocated to my auditors. Some of those are now underway and some will be starting very, very shortly. And I can confirm that we'll have all of the work completed or substantially completed by the 31st of March. There may be the odd little bit here and there that needs to be done after the year end, and that's quite normal. For example, issuing final reports. We've done some work this year, as usual, on the National Fraud Initiative data matching, and this is also for the first time, and because of the circumstances, it's asked us to match grants data. So that will be coming back fairly shortly and after the financial year end. And that'll give an extra layer of assurance to the council that the grants were given out in accordance with the guidelines, which I'm confident that they would have been. We are ourselves doing some grants assurance work, and this is going to be reported on shortly, but not in time for this meeting. And we're looking at things like segregation of duties, whether the grants were approved appropriately, whether the relevant fraud checks were undertaken in advance of the grants being paid. And that's all I've got to say really on this report, but I'd be happy to take any questions at all.
Gillian, thank you very much for that. Councillors, have you got any questions of Gillian on item 6? Councillor Stockwell.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, there's just a couple of things really. Gillian has already covered them to a degree, but obviously the first one is the follow-up with the what was it? The contracts register. Now, this has come up time and time again, and what I'm looking to know is, have we got something in place that is really going to make sure that in future this is going to be done as a matter of due course? What worries me is that if those items, they're quite substantial, are not put on this register, it could be open to fraud, and that is a big issue for me, as it would be for the council in general. But I'm pleased to know that Tom has reassured us that the ones outstanding have now been properly recorded, but I want that reassurance that going forward that we're not going to see this item on this report again. And just one other thing on this one, on page 11, you mentioned the data match stuff with the NFI. Have you established any items of fraud that you needed to report, and how many of those have you found? It would be just an indication of how things are going and where we really need to look at our auditing and what procedures we've got in place to overcome these things. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Gillian, it may be that you would like to answer some of those questions, but Mr. Clark, would you like to comment on the contract register?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. The contract register is required to be updated every quarter. We've now made that monthly in order to keep it up to date. The items that aren't on the register are the smaller items on that list. So Southern Water was a particularly big one that is now on the register. It does require cooperation from everyone across the council, but we do think we have a new procedure in place where we go by the contract notices, so that we should pick up all the contracts. If you look at the contract register, it is quite large, and these are exceptions rather than the rule. Most contracts are there. So we are fairly confident we won't miss any, but we can't guarantee it.
We'll be looking then. Thank you, Mr. Clark.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Clark. Gillian, would you like to comment on that as auditor, that you feel sufficient checks and balances now in place?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm confident now that the cooperation will be forthcoming from the different departments, and also the fact that it's now a monthly update rather than quarterly. I think it will jog people's memories and get the process running more smoothly.
Thank you very much. Councillor Stockwell, I think your hand is still up from your last question.
Yes, I didn't have an answer to my second part, which was about the NFI, the data matches.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor. The data matches haven't yet come back. They're due to come back at the beginning of April. We do find that we have variable success with these matches. Sometimes they do bear fruit, other times not so. It would be interesting to see what comes back with regards to the grant payments. And I think that's fair to say that will be across the whole country, actually, not just Mid Sussex.
I agree. Okay, well, we'll keep our eye on that one as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Stockwell, then you're content? Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Hicks, I believe your hand is up.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just going back to that contract register, I'd just like to clarify, because my understanding was that the authority was required to publish all payments over £500. That's separate from the contracts register, or is it the same thing? And secondly, just to, I note in terms of the clean audit on council tax and housing benefits, but perhaps it would be audited to just give a bit more clarification of the difference between substantial and satisfactory in terms of the audit out. I'll be interested to hear. Thank you.
Gillian, would you be able to answer that?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was just struggling with my audio.
Yes.
If I could address the first point about payments over £500, that is a separate requirement, which also comes from the Transparency Code, and they have to be published every month. So it's separate from the contract register. And the difference between the, sorry, I'm just struggling to find.
Gillian, do take your time. It's not always easy on these.
No,
meetings.
sorry, thank you.
Please take your time.
The difference between the substantial and the satisfactory assurance is if it's a substantial assurance, it doesn't mean improvements can't be made, but it's as good as you're probably going to get. You've got a good system of internal control that's been designed to meet the objectives, and also the controls are being complied with. Whereas with satisfactory, maybe the controls aren't exactly as they should be, but nevertheless they are complied with, or they are in place, but sometimes they're not complied with fully. So it's not an exact science. It is actually based upon many, many years of judgment and sometimes negotiation actually with the departments that you're working with. Sometimes we're persuaded to see things differently because it's not normally a material. It doesn't normally matter that much really, as long as the audit section that the section that we're auditing has agreed to implement the recommendations.
Right, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Gillian. You're content with the situation of internal auditor, and Councillor Hicks, I'm assuming you're content with the answer. Thank you. Then, on the basis that I don't see any other hands up, I'm going to go to the recommendations on page 9, that the committee is asked to receive the report. And perhaps you put your hands up as normal if you are feeling that you wish to do that. And that is carried. Thank you. I'm now going to go on to item 7, but if I might just, I'm going to take my own hands down, sort myself out. Thank you. Right, item 7.
Thank you, Chairman. This is the time of year that I come to you with my internal audit plan. It doesn't differ greatly. It usually looks fairly similar to all the others at the beginning of the year, but there's always scope to change throughout the year, and undoubtedly we do. Last year we undertook, or are undertaking in this current financial year, some work on the grants assurance. The NFI work has been different. It's not a fixed plan, it's a fluid plan that can be amended in consultation with Peter as Section 151 officer. The audit plan has 220 days in it, and I think that that is a sufficient number of days to cover the areas that we need to look at, and Peter's also agreed this. We've covered the main fundamental systems as always. We've got some contingency work, contingency time in there, a small amount if we need to look at other things that aren't already in the plan. And we'll be doing a little bit more grant assurance work in the new year, because different grants have now come out and they're constantly being paid, and puts quite a strain on the authority actually. So we'll be having a look at those and see, just to make sure everything's as it should be. Data matching is in there every year. It does change. Some years we just do council tax and the electoral roll. Other years we have to do a lot more, as we have this year. We'll be looking a little bit more into prioritisation of IT resources, how the resources are used, and cyber security, which we haven't looked at in recent times. And that's probably all really. There's some time allocated to follow-ups as always. And I'm confident that this plan will cover the main risks that I can foresee for the year ahead. And in years 2 and 3, they're pretty much the same. But when we get closer to the time, the plan is looked at, the whole audit universe is re-risked, and we form the plan on that basis. And I'd be glad to take any comments, please, or questions.
Gillian, thank you for that. And nicely succinct, and thank you. Councillors, do you have any questions of Gillian on this item? It also includes, just as so you're aware, Appendix A, which is at the back of the pack. Councillor Stockwell.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a few little things on here. Where are we? So I'm trying to see what I've written down here. Audit plan. Yeah, the fundamental systems, that's good. I noticed that that you're doing an audit, and so are the external auditors, Ernst & Young, EY. So I think that's really good that you've got a cross, you're looking at it from two different aspects. So that gives us some security in knowing that that is going to be a job well done from every perspective. Looking at 5.4, the computer audit, does this also look at the authorizations to systems, for current users and past users, particularly where you've got people working from home and their needs and their needs to access different types of systems may change. Is that something that you look at? So that's one question. Cybersecurity, which you mentioned, I thought that is really good. What I was disappointed to see was that it's you've only got it down for this current, for year one. Yeah, you've only got it, you've got 10 days on that on year one. Now, given the high prevalence of cyber fraud and hacking and so forth, is that not something that we should be looking at on an annual basis? Because while we may find things in, say, this year, the hackers themselves are moving the goalposts so quickly, and we really need to be on the front foot on this and not sort of 3 days behind. So that is my question, and perhaps it's something we need to consider as a committee, is whether we should have that in as a permanent fixture within the internal audit. And just one other little thing on the contingency. It's gone up in years 2 and 3 from 15 to 31 days. I wondered why that was, and why there was, oh yeah, I've done the cyber, that one. There's no cyber security. Yeah, I wondered about the contingency, why it's gone up in those 2 years. That's it. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman.
Would you like to answer, there's 3 questions, I think, in there. Would you like to answer those before I take Councillor Hicks's question?
Yeah, I would. Thank you. And thank you, Councillor. With regards to access to the systems, we look at these in every single audit that we do. So it's not something that we do now and again. We always look at that. We always make sure that the people who have access to the systems are current employees and that it's appropriate for their work as far as we can tell. So that gets done every time. We do now and again find occasions where people have left, but most often when that's happened and they're still on a system that's classed as a fundamental system, they've usually been removed from the network anyway, so they can't, the chances of them accessing anything via the council is much more remote and mitigated. So you can have an assurance from us that access is appropriate.
Thank you.
As far as cybersecurity is concerned, I understand absolutely what you're saying about the people who perpetrate this as becoming cleverer, finding different tactics, and this is definitely something that I would expect to discuss with the Section 151 officer at this time next year, and have a look and whether this is something that we should be looking at as an annual thing. And this is kind of links into the fact that the contingency is higher in years 2 and 3, and that's because it's hard to look ahead that far and actually allocate the time to the audits. In this year, we've allocated time across the areas that we think it's necessary and left a small amount of contingency, but it's too far ahead and too difficult to make an estimate of what we should be including. So we just put the spare days, if you like, into contingency, but then they'll be moved out this time next year when we decide what should go into the plan.
Thank you very much. That was very comprehensive.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gillian. And I think for the benefit of councillors, I spoke with Peter about whether the cyber risk was insured, and to which he confirmed that it was. And my understanding is that insurers are very good at giving people alerts as to what's going on, because they don't want to claim any more or a situation any more than MSDC does. So I would hope that we could be happy with that. But Councillor Hicks, your question, please.
I was just interested in terms of whether you look at things like bad debts and credit balances, thinking of in particular of the bad debt provision for relating to Horsham District Council and partnership risk, and whether that is something that you cover in other areas, or would you look at that specifically, thinking of around the agreements, whether we've got sufficient levels of agreement to manage things like exit. I don't know at what stage that would be considered.
Thank you, Councillor Hicks. Gillian, I think that's within your ambit to reply on that, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor. We haven't specifically looked at the arrangements with Horsham. We do consider debts in the sundry debtors audit, which we're just working on at the moment. We don't necessarily look at the bad debt provision. I hope I'm not speaking wrongly, but I would expect the external auditors to look at the bad debt provisions across the board. So that's not something that we would necessarily look at. The approach we would take is to make sure that debts are being pursued correctly, that the debts are properly incurred, and that if they're irrecoverable, that they're considered for write-off. But we wouldn't specifically, I don't think, cover what you're asking of us.
Thank you, Gillian.
Thank you.
I invite you to comment or make a specific in relation to the specific reply. In other words, you can see I just want to keep us on piece. Thank you.
It was just whether perhaps Peter might be better placed in terms of whether there was any wider issues around partnership agreements. If the issue with the Horsham bad debt shows up an issue with lack of documentary evidence in terms of what might happen when the partnership is dissolved.
Thank you, Councillor Hicks. Peter, might I invite you to comment on that?
Well, yes, thank you, Chairman. I mean, it's very much a one-off. As Gillian has said, I think we have the process to the letter. So we've issued a bill for expenses properly incurred, but you'll appreciate that when the census partnership came to an end, there was something of a disagreement between why it was ending, what the next steps were, and I have to say some of the Horsham members would no doubt say quite rightly that they had some issues with the ending of the partnership, which is why they were leaving. So they didn't see the need to pay their, what we would say was a properly incurred expense. As the committee papers, the cabinet papers did say, Ada Worthing had no such qualms. There was some disagreements about their figure as well, but they, in the end, a good practice won out and they paid their bill. I'm afraid that Horsham and us never saw eye to eye on those expenses. And in the end, the politically expedient, that's a small p, politically expedient thing to do is to say, okay, it was two and a half years ago, let's all move on with our new arrangements and write that debt off. It's unseemly, I'm afraid, when local authorities fall out and the prospect, I think Tom would tell us, the prospect of if you like, seeing them in court would be unpalatable to both authorities. Yeah. And so we made a decision to move on. It's a judgment based within the sort of criteria for bad debts, really. But in the end, it's a judgment, a political judgment, small p. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And I think probably we need to be content with that, unless Mr. Clark has got any comment that he'd like to add to that.
Only as Mr. Stewart's indicated, the courts absolutely hate local authorities suing each other because it's all public money. and it wasn't a completely straightforward case. So I think we would have been criticised by the courts if we carried on.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. I think we've had an acknowledgement as to what's happened, the situation, and I think probably, hopefully, we're all agreed that we can move on. So unless anybody has got a particular issue on it, may I go to the recommendations, which are on page 13? And the committee is asked to comment on the detailed internal audit plan for 2021-2022, Appendix A, and the 3-year internal audit plan as in Appendix B. Now I'm going to ask members to raise their hands in the normal manner. Thank you, councillors. Right, I'm just altering my papers for the moment. Right, we're now going on to item 7, and I think that the first thing that I'd like to say, this is the auditor's report. Contained in there, of course, is the letter, which is saying that
Item 8, I believe.
Yes, sorry, thank you. Item 8, thank you, Councillor, is that Peter has again achieved and given us an audit which has no qualifications whatsoever, and many thanks. So I'm going to ask Mr. Dunkley, I think that's right, Peter, if you would like to introduce the paper. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, it'd actually be Kevin Suter who will be presenting the paper.
Oh, right, okay. And is he here?
I am here, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Kevin, thank you very much. You can't quite look round the table and say, oh, there you are. Right. Well, Kevin, without further ado, perhaps you would take us through the audit, and thank you.
Not a problem at all. And it's going to be a fairly short presentation because, as Peter's report says, or the covering report says, this summary doesn't contain any new information regarding our audit. The purpose of the annual audit letter is to summarise the audit for you to publish on your website and the public to access, should they be so minded to want information on our work and conclusions. We brought our previous report to you, to your previous meeting on the 17th of November. The difference is really is we try and simplify it a little bit. We take out the technical content regarding the accounts. We summarise the risks and the findings to make it a little bit more digestible, and we have that different audience in mind. So I will give the key headlines in the executive summary. So page 24 of the pack and our report summarises the impact of COVID-19 and the differences we had to go through in terms of our work for the year compared to previous years. On page 25 of the pack, the report then confirms that following the last committee meeting on the 17th of November, we did sign an unqualified audit opinion. And I confirm that we also did sign an unqualified value for money conclusion, and you have proper arrangements in place. Although I've spotted we've not quite amended that section of the report, which will get fixed following this meeting. We've still got have stroke have not, and it's definitely have as the answer.
Thank you, Kevin. I was hoping that you would confirm that.
Yes, my apologies for the oversight on that section. Then on page 26, we confirm we certified the audit as complete on the 20th of November. So as there's no new information on the detailed content, I'm going to skip all the way through to page 44 of the pack and the section on the audit fees. In our report to the committee on the 17th of November, we had to be confirmed on the audit fees, and this section of the report then confirms the discussions we have subsequently had with Peter regarding two aspects, scale fee rebasing and then additional fees for some different specific areas. So for scale fee rebasing, this element is a response to the public sector audit appointments request to discuss amending the scale fee to try and come up with the organisation a fee that addresses the risks of the audit and puts the fee on a sustainable footing. It's been evidently clear through the PSAA's review and through subsequent reviews, such as by Sir Tony Redmond, that fees are not reflecting risk now. over time, fees have been cut on a percentage basis, while different bodies have been undertaking different requirements, undertaking different activities. And where an audit fee really should reflect the risk of what's going on, that has been very much divorced. So PSAA requested conversations to be had with all authorities to try and work out whether we could put that on a basis where the fee does equate to the risk. We started to have those conversations in February last year. We paused them for a few months due to the impact of the coronavirus pandemic. We didn't think a discussion about the scale fee was necessary in March last year, when you had to react to the initial impact of the coronavirus, and we picked it up again in sort of spring and summer with all of our authorities. So we've had a good discussion with Peter. We've talked the aspects through. We haven't reached agreement between us, so what we are going to be doing is now presenting that aspect to the PSAA for them to try and make a decision. The second aspect of the fees is what I would describe as more traditional variations. So those associated with significant one-off changes we only have to look at on a yearly basis, or aspects where we had to react and change our procedures related to the coronavirus pandemic. So we set out those on the page of our report, page 45 of the report. We've summarised them into the key areas, which were the additional work we undertook on property valuations, where we identified changes to the valuation we reported to you in the previous meeting. Issues around the going concern work that we undertook and the financial sustainability of the organisation, and not related to COVID-19, but work that we undertook in relation to your change in the financial management system. During our audit plan, we expected that to be in the region of about £9,700. As the members will be able to see, we did actually manage to bring that in less. So the final aspect for that will be 7,760. That element won't be repeated in future years, not unless you change your financial management system again, which I don't believe the organisation has any plans to do in the near future. We still have one element of to be confirmed on this fee table. That relates to our work on the housing benefits subsidy report that you have to submit to the Department of Work and Pensions. We have completed that work to the DWP's deadline of the 31st of January. Again, we're in the position now just wrapping up the final aspects of the fee related to the work. So that should be concluded shortly, and we can provide that information through to you after the discussions have been completed, if you would feel that's of benefit to you. Otherwise, that number will come through in our audit plan for the next year towards the next meeting. So that's the end of my presentation of the report this evening. I would be happy, and as would Mr. Dunkley, to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Kevin. Again, very succinct, and thank you. Councillors, have you got any questions of either Kevin or Jack? Councillor Hicks.
Thank you, Chairman. First is a comment, really, that I do think that the audit fee is low in terms of comparison with my own small organisation. I think I'll have to be contacting my own auditors and see if I can get a reduction if this is what the audit fee for a local authority is. And I just wondered if there's, what shortcuts this means for the audit in terms of, does it mean that there's less testing in terms of achieving a certain objective, or subsidiary issues like value for money maybe not treated in the same level of detail, or is there a loss being incurred for you as providers?
I'd like to assure the councillor and all members that it's the latter. We basically incur a very low return on the fees, if any return at all. We do not compromise our quality just because we are not getting the fee that we believe is necessary. That will be completely counterproductive to what we need to do and the assurance we need to give you and the public from our activities. So the focus is on trying to maintain or get the fees to a sustainable level and maintain them. We're certainly not taking shortcuts on the audit.
Thank you, Kevin. And I think Councillor Hicks has enough public comment on audits and auditors currently to, I'm sure, to keep EY's knows it right in the direction and to the grindstone on this. So, so thank you. Councillor Stockwell.
Thank you, Chairman. Just one quick one on these fees. You note on the bottom other non-audit services. Well, you are auditing them, is what I think. Is there, because it's an ongoing thing, this happens every year, should that not form part of your overall charge? So it would be included within the audit fee. Is there a reason why it's on a separate line on its own? Thank you.
Yes, so when we have to set our fees, they have to be split between audit services and non-audit services. That's a ethical requirement. So while we undertake the work on your housing subsidy report every year, we don't have to. And the council could equally employ another firm or somebody else to undertake that work. That we submitted a bid to the council, they chose us to do the work, and we are happy to do so, but we do need to separate that out to be clear, the ratio of the fees between the statutory audit and any other services we provide, the housing benefit one being falling into the category of other services.
Lovely, thank you very much.
Jack, may I just ask you, do you believe there's anything else as the external auditors that you would like to bring to council's attention?
No, nothing from me, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. I see no other hands raised, so I'm going to assume that councillors are content, and I'm going then to the recommendations on page 19, which is that the Audit Committee is recommended to note the 2019-2020 annual audit letter, and we're to raise our hands in the normal manner if you're agreeable. Thank you, councillors. That's the end of item 8, and we're on to item 9 now. I'm just bringing my papers to hand. This is quite, I think, quite complicated, this section, because there's lots of bits to it, because you can see in Roman numerals there's 1 to 4 items. And what I'm going to suggest that we do is to take each section one by one, but as we conclude item 1, I will ask if everybody is content, and if we are, we go to Roman 2, and then subsequently until we've got to the end of 4, and then I will come back to the overall recommendation to agree the entirety, the items. And I'm hoping that you will concur with that. So the first section, which is on your pages 49 to 61, I think it's relatively straightforward, but what I would like to do, councillors, is, because it doesn't always appear in our papers, and I draw your attention to page 53, item 1.2.3, scrutiny. And it says here that the reports are required to adequately scrutinise before being recommended to the council. It's undertaken by the audit committee, which may make recommendations regarding aspects, treasury management, etc. I'm just drawing your attention to that so that you're content of what's going on there. So if we are to look at initially the first section, which is the management strategy. Does anybody, now, excuse me just a minute, that is going to be introduced by Peter. And Peter, away you go. Thank you very much.
Well, just some general remarks, actually, Chairman, to say really that this strategy, as you say, comes before the Audit Committee for consideration before going on to Council. I think we have that in for the end of March right now. You could think by the titling of it that it was actually written by me, but of course it wasn't. It was written by The lady you see on screen before you, Pamela Koppelman from Ada Worthing, who is our expert in these matters. You'll find later on there'll be some questions, if you have questions, that probably only Pamela can answer. I should probably know the answers to these, and I have a working knowledge, but actually Pamela has the in-depth knowledge of what some of these indicators actually indicate to the council, if you want to get that level of detail. I suppose the opening remark really I'd like to say is there's not much different between this strategy statement and the annual investment strategy than last year's one. Hopefully we've drawn out in the papers what the changes are. Members will appreciate, I think, that the government has been trying extraordinarily hard to help out business and the economy during the time of the pandemic. And some of the, a couple of the changes that we are proposing to make within here, such as including the Al Rayyan Bank in here, is because we have been at times, and this is not a technical term, awash with funds from central government. And to be honest, unless we just simply lend it back to them very quickly to the debt management office the next day or even the same day, we would be breaching many of our counterparty limits. And remember, I think I mentioned this before, on the first, I think it was the 1st of April of 20, £26 million came in. I saw a letter just this week, another 11 was coming in to be paid out in grants. And there is often a substantial lag between us receiving the funds and the businesses claiming it and us paying it out. So at times we are finding it hard to place funds in the market without breaching our counterparty limits. It's not a huge issue because I think in terms of risk, if we place, I don't know, let's say 5 million rather than 3 million with Lloyds Bank, I don't think that substantially increases the risk the risk levels for the authority. We know the banks are good for the money, but it's something we don't want to do. We don't want to be breaching limits. So we're trying to bring in more counterparties, and the Al Rayyan Bank is one of them. But other than that, it's probably best to sort of, if you like, go through the report almost page by page and see if members have any queries and comments and questions, of course, that we can answer. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. And I agree with you, page by page. Shall we take the pages 49 to 61, I think it is, and ask councillors if they have any questions on anything in there. Councillor Hicks.
Sorry, thank you. Just in terms of the projection of capital receipts, I don't know what date that projection takes place, but in terms of the sale of land that we've talked about in December, I don't know how that would fit in to that projection. In terms of the table on page 55, you're estimating receipts going forward.
Yes, so I think actually the receipts are actually on page 56, on my copy at least. Funds available for investment. So that shows the receipts. The tables in page 55 show what we do with what the need is to have receipts to fund expenditure. Of course, we're not proposing to spend it, therefore there's not a need to use the receipt.
Thank you. But in terms of the actual, is that the general fund line on page 54?
Mm-hmm.
Because on my page 55, there's a new table with capital receipts at the top. Is that expenditure from capital receipt?
Yes, that's right. So that's those two tables sort of work together. This is our capital expenditure in 2.1, and the next table then tells you how you're going to fund it. It doesn't show all capital receipts. I think that's right, Pamela, isn't it?
Okay. Thank you.
Capital receipts, though, are forecast in paragraph 2.4. So if we're talking about, let's say, a large capital receipt from a sale of land, that will be in that figure of £28.053 million.
Right, sorry, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hicks. Councillor Cornish, I believe your hand is up.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a question on 3.6 regarding the debt rescheduling on page 61. And I was just noting the final sentence on that paragraph, really, about any rescheduling. I just wondered if anything had changed regarding that. Obviously, we don't want to incur any fees paying that early, but I just wondered if there was any further thoughts on that, because obviously it says rescheduling will be reported to the council at the earliest meeting following its action. I wasn't quite sure what that meant, following its action.
Shall I answer that one, Peter?
Thank you, Pamela. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. It simply means that if Peter decided to do some rescheduling, we would immediately prepare a report and submit it to you. But at the moment, there's no intention to repay anything prematurely, because we would still be liable for all the interest on the loan.
Okay, thank you.
And you're content, Councillor Cornish? Thank you. There's just a comment that I would, because Peter very kindly has highlighted the Al Ryan Bank. And I did discuss it with him yesterday, and I'm very well aware of what his problem is as to where to put the money. As I'm sure councillors understand, this is a Sharia bank, and certainly there's no problem about that. But I don't understand how they work, and I don't understand their rules. And I'm afraid sometimes I go back to the sage of Omaha's comment, Warren Buffett, who says, if you don't understand it, don't get involved with it. They are well capitalized. They're owned by I've looked to see they're owned by the Qatar Bank, but they have had a rocky ride in past years from the items I've seen by Googling it, where they had to have a substantial cash injection from their owners, but they are a branch, and therefore the owners are not necessarily want to do that. I would draw your attention to the fact that they are certainly regulated by our Financial Conduct Authority. But having said that, whilst that ought to be everything to everything, we certainly know that the Governor of the Bank of England is having his feet held to the fire for the FCA's activities for London and counties, and I think Mr. Woodward is probably a little closer to the fire than he would want to do, but they're both have been regulated by the FCA. So, you know, the money's there and this, that and the other, but I just say to councillors, I don't pretend to understand how a bank works, but I've got a rough idea, but I don't understand how, and that's because nobody's educated me, and so it's my ignorance. But I'm sure perhaps councillors may well have more information to concede, because I'm going to, if I may, close this section down, because we can then go into the annual investment strategy. And I'm sure councillors will have already read, there are very substantial checks and balances which are gone through before any bank is chosen, and I understand that. But as I say, it's just something I don't understand, and that just gives me a word of caution. But councillors, it will be up to you to decide, and not me. So coming back to the first section, Roman 1, can I say that we're content to move on to Roman 2? Councillor Stockwell, you've got something on Roman 1 still?
Yeah, I was just going to carry on from your thoughts about the Sharia bank. No, they don't pay interest or don't earn interest, but it's done on a profit share, basically, and how they marry that up I'm not too sure, but that's how it operates. What is interesting is that their investments are ethical investments, which I think is something that this council will be very pleased to see. But obviously, I don't quite, rather like you, I'm not familiar overly with Sharia Bank, and I know that how they raise their money is different to the way our mercantile or our retail banks in this country operate. But I suppose if they're working on a profit share, it's how we're able to or how they are able to say to us, oh yes, well, if you invest this much, we'll be able to give you whatever the percentage rate is. I don't know how they actually get round to that figure. Have they got a crystal ball or something? So that's my only issue on that one. But in other terms, I think it looks quite interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
I think Pamela wants to speak.
Yeah, I'm going to say, I see Pam. I think Pamela's hand is up. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to explain that we're constantly reviewing the market for potential investments, always based on the security, liquidity, yield profile. As Peter explained, we've had a great need for extra counterparties this year in order to diversify. We could put it all with Lloyds, but then there's no diversification. And this is one bank that the brokers brought before us, and that Link, our Treasury advisors for the whole service, also do support. But as you touched on, Chairman, the list of specified banks is only that, a list for us to look at, a list that we thought probably would be acceptable. But before we ever place an investment, we do our due diligence to make sure that they're still a safe and secure investment. But the other reason that this particular bank stood out for us was for the ethical social governance, which this committee had raised earlier in the year. And so it did seem an appropriate name to include. The thing is, the unspecified options for us mean that we could use any of these banks anyway if they matched our credit ratings. But being cautious, we do like to use the specified list that you have all seen and that we're reasonably happy with at the time. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Pamela, and thank you for that input. I think then for the moment, unless anybody has any objection, I'm going to say that we have discussed item 1 and we are content with what's there because we've still got item 2 to look at. So may I go to item 2? Thank you. So Peter, are you going to introduce this, or can we take it that you have introduced it?
I think we can say that we've introduced it. We're not actually changing our basis of our strategy. Our strategy will always be based on security, liquidity, and yield in that order. So in that sense, there's no changes. As it's not actually, there's a paragraph here in 63. It would be paragraph 11 or 12, but it hasn't got a number next to it. The above criteria are unchanged from last year, other than 4.1. So I think we are on safe ground here in making no changes, aside from bringing in a couple of, or one new bank.
Right, thank you, Peter. So on Roman 2, 9-point Roman 2 on the agenda, may I move on? Oh, sorry, Councillor Stockwell, I see your hand is up.
Sorry, Chairman, I know I'm a bit of a pain, aren't I?
No, not at all, Councillor. Whatever you have to say is relevant to this meeting.
Just the one item on local authorities and parish councils. Now, I assume that, because I'm not really that au fait how that works, I assume that if we're investing with them, they're borrowing the money. Now, my concern is in the current circumstances, with a lot of councils are really struggling with their numbers, their figures. As we are here, and we're in a pretty damn good place compared to a lot of other councils. So my concern is, what due diligence is done if we're placing money with other local councils to ensure that we get A, our capital back, and B, some interest out of it. Thank you.
Peter, would you like to answer that, or would it be Pamela?
Well, there's probably a technical and a non-technical answer to that. So I'll do the non-technical answer, really, which is that local authorities, of course, are sovereign bodies. There's never been an example of a local authority going bust. It can't go bust. It is effectively, if it had any problems, and you've seen problems that have occurred, both with, say, Northampton or even Croydon, the government steps in. And they have revenue raising powers. They have powers to change capital into revenue. It's sort of non-technical terms, and therefore the covenant strength of local authorities is absolute. So, given that we've only specified, I think, £3 million as any one individual body, I think that is quite a safe option. I wouldn't extend the same remarks to parish councils. I'm afraid parish councils obviously are much smaller. I think they can be dissolved more easily than a district and a county or a unitary. Therefore, we'd be far more cautious at dealing with parishes. In fact, I'm not sure we've ever actually lent to a parish council. No, we haven't. No, and that's going back some years, back to '74. So we've never lent to parish councils. I don't think we'll be doing that in the future.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I think one of Councillor Stockwell's concerns is that those with a longer memory can remember a certain amount of kerfuffle in Iceland some years ago. Right. So if we then go to 9. Roman 2, I'm going to assume that we are all content on that, which then would bring us to effectively Roman 3, Roman 4. And those run then from pages 69 through to, well, the end of the pack to all intents and purposes. So is there anything there which councillors would wish to discuss? Councillor Stockwell.
Thank you, Chairman. Me again. Just a couple of things. I was just trying to get my head around on Appendix 1, which is under 1.2, the ratio of financing costs to net revenue streams. I just didn't quite understand that. I couldn't quite ascertain whether the ratio was good or bad. So perhaps somebody might enlighten me on that one, please. And there, where were we? On Appendix 1, page 88. Bear with me. Oh, I've gone to the wrong. No, ignore me. That's Agenda 10. No, we're not into Agenda 10 yet, are we? No. No, I think that was the only thing on that one. I think it's just the that particular ratio on there. Are we going to the very end of this report then, Chairman? We are, aren't we?
Well, because it all morphs into one, and
yeah, it does. Yes.
Peter has been kind enough with Pamela's assistance, effectively, to have commented on all 4 sections.
That's fine, because that's the other bits I've looked at on the next one. So it's just an understanding of that ratio, please. Thank you.
Can I take that, Peter? Yeah. Can I just highlight the fact that the format of the report is not my format. It's all required by the government. That's why it's so technical and complicated. The ratio of financing costs to net revenue stream, your ratios are excellent, very low. It's comparing the cost of your borrowing, so the interest and the minimum revenue provision cost, which is the amount set aside to cover the capital cost to spread it over the asset life. So it's comparing those costs with the net revenue stream that you have as a council. So the reason your percentage fluctuates such a lot from 1920 to 2021 is because we take the interest cost and MRP and we deduct your investment income. And the investment income has plummeted this year as the rates dropped down. So where you were earning 400,000 or whatever it was last year, that has dropped right down this year. And because your financing costs are so low, that change in investment income has an extreme effect. And because the forecast for interest rates, as shown elsewhere in the report, are that they will remain low for a couple more years, that percentage remains around about 1% for the next couple of years. By 23-24, we're hoping rates will have improved a bit, but also by then you'll have paid off even more of the very little debt you already have. So that ratio improves again. Does that make it clear? It is.
Yes, I thought I had it in my head, but I thought I'd just get you to explain that to me so that I was on the right track. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, so you have very low financing costs. So any change in investment income has a very high effect on that ratio, but a ratio of 1% is excellent.
Isn't it just? Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on the balance of this report? I would just like to ask Peter of a couple of items, and it really is going to the back of the report. And in fact, it's the last, yes, it is in fact the last page. It's to page 84. Because we've got approved countries for investments, and we've got the AAA with countries that we all know, and I would suggest are, as laymen, comfortable with the way that they run their prudentially run for their finance systems. Something that does concern me though is that we've got Hong Kong, and one of the sort of little tests I always put: would you put Granny's money in a bank in Hong Kong today, as being not living in Hong Kong and being outside it? And I was just drawing your council's attention to the dichotomy that HSBC are having at the moment with frozen accounts and this, that and the other. And we've got Abu Dhabi, who may take a different view of the UK in perhaps even the immediate future for certain other matters which are going on. And so, Peter, I wonder perhaps if you, or perhaps Pamela, and I understand all of the checks and balances, but perhaps you would comment as to whether those ought to stay there or whether there should be an amendment. Thank you.
Shall I take this, Peter? This list is not actually a list of countries that we are approving for investments. This is actually a list of credit ratings, of sovereign ratings. So this is all the countries with those sovereign ratings above, or AA minus and above. So that doesn't mean we've got any intention of investing in those countries' banks, but it's a question of fact that those countries have those credit ratings, and that's a list supplied by our Treasury Advisors Link. And it's something that possibly you don't need to have in this report. This certainly isn't a compulsory element of the report, but and as a matter of interest, we have no investments in foreign banks at the moment at all, on your behalf or Ada or Worthing. But yeah, it's there for information, really.
And thank you. Yes, in other words, that's for information. So we can pass on from there. And whilst I take your comment, no overseas bank, because the Al Ryan Bank is domiciled in the UK. But is that money about to be deposited, or are we, because just so we thoroughly understand, are we authorising that that is a commitment which may be taken out?
You can take that commitment out. This report only is live from the 1st of April, and once your full council has approved it. So if you want to take out Al Ryan Bank or anything else, then that's, or you can recommend that, I think is the situation. You can recommend that to council. We certainly have no commitment to invest anything until it's fully approved.
Thank you. Well, I certainly don't want to put Peter in between a rock and a hard place, but it is effectively public money, and that's, I'm not casting any aspersion on this bank because it's very well capitalised, but I just don't understand it, how it works. Have any other councillors got a view? Oh, sorry, Councillor Cromie, thank you.
Hi, this might be a really stupid question, so forgive my ignorance from the outset. But in the approved investment institutions list, we've got information detailed in the various different areas where money can be invested, but they don't have interest rates. So do we know what, if any, return we'll get with investing money into those outlets? Because that might help, particularly if we're considering Al Ryan, what that might benefit us as a council.
Thank you. Pamela, is that something you could, and I thank you for waving your hand, but it's almost immersed in your blue sleeve, which then is in front of your very nice blue jumper, and it's very difficult to pick it up. So Pamela,
Sorry,
thank you.
Sorry, no, the answer is we can't give the interest rates because this is a forward-looking document from the 1st of April and rates change on a daily basis. So the rate that's available today will not be the rate that's applicable from the 1st of April or the 3rd of April or the 10th of April. And that's what we do as a service. We're scrutinising the rates. So, for example, today you had sufficient liquidity to place a £1 million investment. So we look across all the available rates on the basis of the list of approved investments that we've got. We find the best one available. We check we're not exceeding your counterparty limits. We check that there have been no notices warning us that there's a problem with that bank. We confirm with Peter that it's an acceptable investment, and then we place it. And exactly the same would happen with Al Ryan. And what I did forget to mention is that, yes, they do something with profit shares to justify the Sharia law, but any investment we place is for a fixed term deposit. And at the time it was mentioned to us, they were offering 0.3% for a year. I know it's awful, but it's comparable with what we're getting elsewhere, but it is a fixed term investment with a fixed interest rate. So we would know on the day that we wanted to invest if they were offering the best rate. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Pamela. Councillor Hicks.
Yes, so in terms of the Al Ryan Bank, I would see that as no more risk than any of the other banks. They're equally opaque in terms of where they get the money from. And in terms of risk profile, they've probably got a lower risk profile by ignoring some of the non-ethical investments in terms of tobacco and oil companies. It's part of a list, so and it's being considered. It's got AAA rating, albeit lower tier, and it's up to our advisors. And if it's up to the same standards as the other banks, which clearly it is, and it offers competitive interest rates, which it does. I've noticed it's top of the personal interest rate in terms of ISAs. So I would fully support it being on the list. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hicks. Councillor Cromie, I think you want to come back.
Yeah, completely different question. question. So I think Councillor Stockwell was one who mentioned that LAN had ethical investments. Do we as a council look at these different institutions and take any or give any weight to green investments or a green ethos when we decide where we might be placing our money, or is it purely based on the criteria that you detailed in your answer to the first question?
Shall I take that, Peter?
Thank you, Pamela. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. We investigate everything available, and your committee, as well as Adrian Worthing's councillors, have also been very interested in looking at green investments. So we did quite a bit of work with Barclays on that, and Lloyd's also had an offer, but unfortunately their rates were so low that although we go security, liquidity, yield, really we had to go with somebody else at the time. What we do is that we check out the ethical, social, governance statements or the green statements or whatever sustainability statements that each of your counterparties has. So every investment that we've made for you this year, we have checked on their statement to make sure they have got a good sustainability policy. Obviously, we're not checking that they stick to it, or we're not able to do that. But Link, the Treasury advisors, are currently doing a lot of work around ethical, social and governance, and they will be supporting us to do that. Obviously, it would be open to you as a committee to make green or sustainable investments a higher priority, but given the drop in investment income already, and given that we are only placing money with what we consider to be ethical and sustainable businesses, that would lead to another loss in income, unfortunately. I mean, for example, we've considered other banks such as Qatar Bank and decided no, that we won't go with them for, you know, reasons of fuel and so on.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think councillors, we've discussed this, and I think we're coming to a landing to mining to support this. The more astute will have noticed that we have morphed, in fact, item 10 into this as well. So the good news is that unless somebody says that we haven't, I believe we have also discussed item 10. So what I was going to do was to go back, as I said at the beginning, and go across all the recommendations. And I thank councillors, we've had a robust discussion on a number of items there. And we might just say to Peter before he jumps, that he just make sure that the political international situation is fine. So what I'm going to recommend, councillors, is that we propose that the council agree Roman 1, the proposed Treasury Management Strategy Statement TMSS for 2021 and the following 2 years. Roman 2, the Annual Investment Strategy AIS and the Minimum Revenue Position brackets MRP as contained in Section 4 and 2.3 respective of the report. And Roman 3, the proposed amendments to the specified and non-specified investment dependencies, an item for the prudential indicators contained with this report. So I'm going to ask you to raise your hands appropriately for this item. Thank you. Thank you, councillors. And that being so, I'm going to go on unless anybody wishes to. I've still got a lot of hands up, but I think let me just take mine down. Because Councillor Stockwell, did you want to come on item 10?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Oh, I'll take my hand down now. Yeah, just a couple of things. Right, Appendix 1, page 88. The land property revenue reserve. Is the what it's saying in here about we're not making any further funding investments there? How is that affecting our purchasing of temporary housing? And you know, is this affected by that, or is temporary housing something that's doesn't fall within this particular program? And the last one I want to know is on page 91. We've got capital receipts for 21-22. We've got 2.9 million, and then it goes down for the rest of the following years. What are we expecting something specific in this current or the next the next financial year? Thank you. Did you get the gist of that?
Peter, are you comfortable with the question?
I am, thank you. So let's just explain, I'm not muted, yes. Let's just explain the appendix, which shows what we're going to spend next year, how we're going to finance it. So we think we're going to spend £2.8 million on temporary accommodation, most of which, if not all of which, is going to be met from capital receipts. Because the council agreed in September, and hopefully will agree tomorrow, its budget strategy to support the general fund with the general reserve. So what we've done then is say, actually, let's stop spending any more money from general reserve, because there's a possibility over the medium term we will run out of funds. So council has been asked to agree tomorrow night to spend on the temporary accommodation to buy more units, but only if and when capital receipts come forward. And the problem with capital receipts coming forward is you never can tell when they're going to come in. In the past, the distant past, we have put together spending plans for new items. This is going back some time now, and then the receipt doesn't come forward. And so what do? Do you then carry on with your spending plans and borrow the money, or do you put it off until the receipt does come in? What happens then? So we've tried to make it now that we'll only spend the money when and fulfill our spending plans when the receipts come in. So for next year, we think we're going to get £2.9 million of receipts, or need to use £2.9 million of receipts, which we've got plenty of receipts coming in over the next few years. We just don't quite know when they're coming in. But that's what we think we need to use to finance our capital program next year. So you're right. In terms of paragraph 2.2, I think the land and property revenue reserve has something like £100,000 left in it. It's something like that, which won't get us very far at all in buying temporary accommodation. So, as it says, there's no prospect of making any expenditure from that fund right now.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Peter. Are there any questions on any more questions on item 10?
Well, Chairman, can I just clarify something? If members are happy with this, and I didn't want to assume they would be happy, because there are some things still to do, particularly a property investment strategy to write because of the changes to PWLB. But if they're happy with the way this has been put, it's quite possible that tomorrow night's meeting of the council to agree a corporate plan, it does, if members have gone through it, they'll see there's a capital strategy section in that. So if members have no objections, put it this way, tomorrow night you can agree a capital strategy. Otherwise, we'll have to work it up a bit further and come back to a 31st of March meeting. But I didn't want to assume that members would be happy with it and to say it's going along tomorrow night. That doesn't give us much time if people have got queries and comments they want to make.
Councillors, do you have a view on Peter's comment or offer? Then I think
quite happy to go along with it.
Thank you, Councillor Stockwell. Peter, I think the meeting is minded to support you on this, and thank you very much. In as much as you've explained the situation and we've taken that on board. So unless anybody has raising their hand, I'm sorry to stare at the screen so carefully, but since the new Zoom has come down, yellows virtually do not reflect on my screen. They do on the old Zoom because I was on an app a couple of hours ago and it worked perfectly. But anyway, I don't see anybody else. Councillor Cromie, that wasn't your hand up to speak?
No.
Right,
no, I can't.
Right, then I'm going to go to the recommendation that the committee is recommended to forward the draft strategy to approval by the council at the next appropriate meeting. And so we are going to vote as we have done before. Thank you, councillors. So that clears away item 10. That leads me on to 11. Questions, persons, council procedures will, excuse me, 10.2, of which have been given, and I have none. That being so, councillors, thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you for looking so diligently at the papers that we've had in front of us. And I will draw the meeting to a close at 18:26. And I think we're asked to stay for 10 seconds whilst the live feed concludes. Councillors, thank you for your indulgence and have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Cheers.